The pain of immigrants in this country, and they're always reminding us that we're all immigrants because this land belongs to the First Nations people. And so when the reality that we're always being reminded of immigrants, there's a very big anti-immigrant sentiment in this country as well. And so when people like Haitians came here, I'm from Miami, and when Haitians were coming here, and mind you, the reality of Miami, whereas they would allow the Cubans to come in and they would send the Haitians back, and babies on rafts were dying in the Atlantic Ocean, and Cuban Elian Gonzalez was a real big deal in this country. So we cannot ignore that truth. But when you talk to Haitians, and a lot of Haitians in Miami would say, Black people in America treat us like shit. They don't really understand that Haiti to me is sacred, right? Because Toussaint let Overture and them, because it wasn't Toussaint by himself, they kicked down the door for the revolution to lead to our freedom. And a lot of times they feel that they are treated poorly. But my point is that instead of pointing fingers at who is more wrong, my point is, how do we heal? Because they've poisoned us all into believing that because you are Black American, you lazy and violent. Because I come from immigrants, we come here to take from y'all. And they got us all fighting for the scraps while they're sitting up at the feast, looking down at us, saying we ain't got to do it no more. They're doing it to themselves and each other. And so for me, that is exactly why I am perplexed at how to approach this, because I want to approach it from a healing perspective instead of adding, gasoline to the fire, because I know Black people in America are tired. My grandmother came here during the Civil Rights Movement and was reminded that even if she didn't speak English, she was Black. Right, so they was like, "Get in line, punk," as Martin would say. So go ahead.
Yeah, yes. So I want to make an analogy that I will, before even making, understand that it is a crude analogy, but you'll see my point in a moment. A lot of times, people I have a lot of conversations in the context of dealing with police and community. And the thing that always is said when police have these conversations with community and community leaders is like, yo, not all of us feel that way. Not all of us are bad. And the thing that I always say in response is, until and unless you are willing and ready to actually give voice and call out those who do not align in that way, from the naked eye, as someone who's not a policeman, I don't know the difference. And so I think that it's very clear, like, from what you're saying, do I know cognitively that there are members of the Latino and Latinx community who do not share those beliefs? Absolutely, right? And I think you started to see some of that in terms of, like, we talked about the clip that was on Baller Alert, where that woman was talking about the difference between Venezuelans and Colombians and white Cubans down in Florida, and sort of making it clear that it is in fact a different space depending on who you're talking to and understanding the differences between them. But that has to happen at a greater clip, because for us, and when I say us, I'm talking about Black Americans, when we look at the community and we look at those exit poll numbers, for example, all we see is like, damn, that's how you feel? Oh, yep. Okay. And so some of it has to be like, yo, I want to be very clear and consistent. We don't fuck with them. We're not fucking with them. Like, that has to be very clear, because the other thing that is very important to understand about Black Americans in our community is that very, very few of us as American-born Black people have the ability to sort of navigate our identity by way of convenience. Yes. And what I mean by that is, for those people who are watching who don't understand what I mean by that is, yo, you look at me, I'm Black. You know that I'm Black. You may not know where I'm from. You may not know, like, sort of the depths of my ethnicity, but that in large part is the case in the experience for most American-born Black people. Whereas for members of other communities, they can sort of like conveniently dip out and be like, oh, if you don't know that I'm ethnic, I won't be ethnic today because it's my advantage. And that's a privilege that certain members of ethnic groups enjoy. Obviously, that's not the case for everyone, right? But it is the case for a number of different ethnic groups. The issue there is that if you're not someone who's willing to actually give voice to be like, I don't fuck with that group over there, and what they're talking about is wrong. And and I'm like, the issue is that because I may be on the outside of the community, I don't know the difference.
So let me cut you off right quick since you hit me with the hip hop hands. Listen, we got our white people too, and I don't think people realize that. You think those Mexicans were not looking at those Cubans and saying, y'all voted for him after what he said about us? And I want to break it down because I think people don't really understand that Puerto Ricans that's a colony. They call it a commonwealth. It's a colony. They're U.S. citizens. They are treated like slaves. Puerto Rico cannot file for bankruptcy. Look up the Jones Act. There's a lot of blackness in Puerto Rico. We're very connected to our African heritage. Boom. Dominicans, Hispaniola. In a fucking, how many decades fight with Haiti that was perpetuated by colonization, right? Black people fighting black people saying, I'm not like that, right?
I know black, Poppy. I know, I live in New York. This is like a weekly thing, right? No, Poppy, I know black. I know. What? You look like Sammy Sosa before the surgery. What are you talking about?
So now you have that. Now you're talking about Cubans, right? I have pure Castilian blood. I'm from the Canary Islands. So what people don't really understand is that we have so much, we have our white people too. And white people are gonna white people. After you've seen in this election. So when you're talking about Latinos or Latinx people, we got our white people too, right? So, and I don't think people understand, a lot of Spanish blood lives in the Caribbean. A lot of that pure Spanish blood, it lives in South Africa. You see these white people telling you they South African. We got our white people too. So when we talk about the hip hop hands, people are commenting on the hip hop hands.
Not the hip hop hands.
Not the hip hop hands. Amber, I love you. But when we talk about this, and when we saw what we saw in this election, people don't realize that Cubans, and not all Cubans, but those that voted, they don't give a fuck about immigration because they have political asylum. So immigration is not their issue. And when people say Black Lives Matter didn't resonate with the Cubans, which Cubans are you talking about? Because there are Black Cubans who are like, Black Lives Matter. And it is so complicated and it is so hard because when we're talking to ignorance, you cannot even talk about this stuff because people are like, nah, the Cubans all voted for Donald Trump. I guarantee you that there were some Black Cubans that were like, we ain't fucking with him. We not fucking with him. And there are many of us who were like, what are y'all doing? We're not all the same. So, we were just colonized by Spain and we shared the language. But let me just say that does not mean that we are all the same. Just like you and a Jamaican are not the same, it's the same thing with Latinos.
Right. So I think this is where, I have a big thing that I talk about in terms of having a more sophisticated conversation around race, around ethnicity, around nationality, and around our experiences as Black people, as people of color, and as people of the diaspora. I'll say that again. Black people, people of color, and people of the diaspora. Why do I say that? Because that encompasses all y'all motherfuckers. Like, regardless of whatever group you want to say you're a part of, I just named whatever group that you want to be a part of, right? We have to begin to value facts over feelings and data over assumptions, right? Like, so data actually matters, right? And the reason why I say that is we cannot have a reasoned conversation about what people are doing and what trends are unless we actually are informed about what people are actually doing. Like, we actually have to be able to use the data that is available to us to actually evaluate things and then have a more reasoned conversation. You talked a lot early on about, the sort of disconnect in terms of how do we bridge the divide? And I think the question that I have is a rhetorical one that I encourage everyone who is watching right now, who will watch later, and each of us to actually wrestle with. And that is, what are you doing in your spaces every day
Yes.
to tear down those walls around global anti-Blackness,
Yes.
to educate others? How are you using your platform, right? Like, you obviously have a tremendous platform. I saw a lot of your material about anti-Blackness and colorism in our community before we even had ever spoken, right? And so, and obviously that's a platform that I am like committed to fighting and combating anti-Blackness in pretty much everything that I do. But I think sometimes we have the idea that we have to wait on somebody else to do it, when in fact there are ways that we can have greater impact exactly where we are, through conversation. And like I said, through having the being courageous enough to like be observant and see and say something when you see something and do something about it. And even if that means like, yo, I'm not actually going to continue to participate in traditions or practices that are inherently anti-Black, because now that I know better, I should do better.
That's
and
right.
I think that a large part of us has to take that personally, right? Like, if you don't take that personally, I can't take you serious, because I don't give a fuck about you showing up at a Black Lives Matter rally. I mean, that's great, but at the end of the day, if in your everyday practices you perpetuate anti-Blackness, whether it's against yourself or against others, all of that other shit that you did is just performative, and it doesn't really move the needle, and it doesn't matter. So I think it's really important that we have to understand.
I want you to address this comment because I think it's better coming from you. Black is not Black if Dominican is not Cuban.
Black is not Black if Dominican is not Cuban.
So basically, we all the same.
I think that, I mean, I think that like on a certain level, I don't really have a problem with that. I like, the reality is, it's interesting. You asked me to address it, right?
I want your perspective.
No. My perspective is like, with this whole conversation, that the fascinating thing about this whole conversation is that it's usually not Black people, American Black people, that are trying to get away from being called Black. It's like, it's everybody else who, for some reason, has decided, I don't want to be that. That, like, whatever that is, whatever it is going to draw me closer to that, whether it's my skin color, whether it's my language, whether it's an acknowledgement of my culture, whether it's my ancestors, I want to deny that shit. I want to get as far away from that as possible. And I'm just sitting here in my Blackness like, you think so? Like, you think you could do that? Like, that's not how this whole thing works. So for me, I don't have a problem with, if Black is not Black, then Dominican is not Cuban. Like, I don't have a problem with that. In a very, very clear way, if you understand the diaspora,
yeah,
that's not a debate. That comment that Trap Recruiter made, if you understand the diaspora, that is not even a debate. It's not.
And I agree with you. But the issue is that we are, first of all, I'm going to address El Bacano, who's Dominican, a multiracial group. Nobody outside of America says the term Black. Get the fuck out of here.
Word. Where the fuck you been, Holmes?
People say you're Dominican. They got a song called Mami, el negro está rabioso. That's bullshit.
I know that shit by heart.
And the thing is, we can't have these conversations if we're not going to be honest, because not only do we use the word Black, we have words like Cocolo. We say all kinds of words that are code words to speak of Black people as if they're less than our own Black people. So you gonna get out of here with that bullshit, because that is not the truth, and it happens everywhere. Because
out here being a tigre, you ain't slick.
You already know. I've been to Africa. I've been to the continent, and I know that they have words there to say to stipulate what Blackness is and what it means to be Black, as if it is less than. So that's not true. But when I talk about Dominicans versus Cubans, I'm just simply talking about colonization, right? Because when we talk about colonization, you hear Latinos flexing on other Latinos, saying, I speak Spanish. I speak the King's Spanish. You're not real because you don't speak the King's Spanish, right? It is all results of that dumb shit that they did to colonize us. And now we holding up flags that our oppressors gave us. We tattooing them shits on our arms.
Looking goofy. Looking goofy.
Yes, looking goofy, because the truth is they've colonized us all. And now we're sitting here having a fight about how we are different. The truth, though, the constant is whiteness versus blackness. And it exists all over the world. And those that are white enjoy certain privileges for that. And that is not exempt to America. That is not exclusive to America. We are not exempt from that. And so that is why I'm trying to talk about, because we have to unpack that at some point.